Good morning, everybody. I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone participating in the GPE webinar series today. My name is Victoria Egbertayo, and I'm a partnership specialist here at the Global Partnership for Education. I'm here in the GPE Secretariat in Washington, D.C., joined by my colleagues, the GPE webinar team. The GPE webinar series began in 2016 as part of GPE's Knowledge and Good Practice initiative, which came about in response to requests from GPE's partner countries for opportunities to exchange knowledge and good practice and policy approaches in an effort to help inform education policies and practices at the country level. The webinar series also provides a platform in which practitioners and partner countries can engage in an interactive dialogue and showcase the innovative work being done across the partnership to deliver better education results for every child as we work tirelessly to fulfill our shared vision of SDG 4. Today, we are hosting a second webinar on the published GPE Results Report 2018. The report is based on a partnership-wide results framework embedded in GPE 2020, our 2016-2020 strategic plan. It outlines our partnership's achievements and lays out areas which we need to improve with respect to the milestones in our results framework. The report also serves as a key tool in holding ourselves as a partnership mutually accountable for achieving our common goals. In this session, findings and conclusions from the results report and how GPE is achieving results and addressing critical challenges in the education sector will be addressed. Now, before I turn the floor over to my colleague, Nidhi Khattri, I would like to direct your attention to a few housekeeping notes before we begin. So please mute your microphones on your phones and computer to cut out any background noise. And if you are experiencing any connection issues, please let us know via email at webinars@globalpartnership.org. webinars@globalpartnership.org. We will have a Q&A session after the presentation, so please send us your comments and questions through the webinar via YouTube's live chat function and via our email, webinars@globalpartnership.org. The session is also recorded, and following the session, we will share various resources with those that have participated to the webinar today, including the webinar recordings and a blog post and summary notes. I'm now pleased to introduce you to Nidhi Khattri, who works at the Global Partnership for Education, where she leads the Results, Evaluation and Learning team. She is responsible for producing GPE's results report and managing its overall evaluation portfolio, currently comprising 30-plus evaluation studies. Prior to joining GPE, she was the lead evaluation officer in the Human Development and Corporate Evaluations unit of the Independent Evaluation Group at the World Bank, where most recently she co-led the results and performance of the World Bank Group in 2016, IEG's annual flagship publication. So without further ado, and with that introduction, I would like to give the floor to Nidhi Khattri.
Thank you, Victoria. And thank you all for joining and for your interest in GPE and GPE's results. I would also like to introduce to you two of my colleagues here who work with me in the Results and Performance team, Elise and Rudraksh. And after I have covered sort of the key points of the results report, we will have a question and answer, and my colleagues here who worked on the report will also help to answer those questions. So we are discussing the 2018 results report. The results report actually charts progress against GPE's 2017 milestones. And those milestones are in GPE's results framework. This is GPE's second results report under the 2016 to 2020 GPE strategy. We call that GPE 2020. So in this presentation, I will discuss key findings and also note areas for improvement. Just to note, this is a partnership-wide results report, so it covers sort of the results expected across the partnership countries. So let me first say a few words about GPE's theory of change, because the results report traces GPE's results along its theory of change. The theory of change articulates the goals GPE aims to achieve and the way in which it will achieve those goals. GPE, as you can see, has two main goals: improve learning outcomes and increased equity. In order to achieve these, GPE aims to strengthen education systems and help countries' systems become more effective and efficient. At the country level, this outcome of strengthened education systems is enabled through three different objectives that work together in combination. The first is quality sector plan and implementation with mutual accountability and financing. So those three things work together in order to help develop effective and efficient education systems. At the next level down, GPE works at the global level with two objectives: to mobilize financing to help the education systems and to build a strong partnership, again, so that all partners work together to strengthen education systems. GPE's results at all of these levels are measured through the results framework with 37 indicators that have periodic milestones. The 2018 results report discusses 28 milestones that were set for 2017. Now, let's start with a numeric overview of the results before turning to more specific results. GPE overall met 22 out of 28 milestones set for 2017. As we just discussed, the results framework reflects the four levels of GPE's theory of change. The impact level captures results at the student level. Students are the ultimate beneficiaries of GPE's work. The outcome level, the next level down, measures system-level improvements. With a strong education system, we can expect better results for students. In this report, the data for most 7 out of 10 indicators at these two levels are from 2015. These were the latest data available for the 2018 results report. These data are extremely useful for monitoring progress and diagnosing where GPE's efforts should be directed. They do not yet reflect the contributions of work being done under GPE 2020, because GPE 2020 covers 2016 to 2020. However, as you will see, we monitor these results because they show us how students are learning, whether the education systems are becoming better. The next two levels, the country and global level objectives, are about the partnership's current works. These are leading indicators. The data at these levels demonstrate what intermediate results are being achieved under 2020 and whether in the future we can expect to see better results at the impact and outcome levels. So first, let's turn to the first goal, which did not have a milestone in 2017. The first indicator is the number or the proportion of developing country partners, DCPs, with improved learning outcomes. And the second indicator is the percentage of children under age 5 developmentally on track. So what we see here is that although there is no milestone, we still thought it important to look at the indicator and the availability of data for this indicator. And what we see is data availability is still an issue. And this is something that GPE is working on. Currently available information shows that by the end of GPE 2020, data will be available for only 26 countries to measure improvement in learning. Only for 26 countries. That's a small number. But more countries will actually have assessments. We have those numbers in our results report. We will have 48 countries for which assessments will be available. So at least we will understand the status of learning in those countries. We also know that survey data on early childhood development will be available for only 11 countries. And this is an issue also that GPE must continue to work on. We will address these topics on learning assessments and on the availability of data for early childhood development much more thoroughly in the 2019 results report, which will come out in June 2019. And that will also discuss the level of achievement on student learning within DCP countries to the extent that the data will be available. Now, turning to the second goal, which pertains to equity, gender equality, and inclusion, the partnership met all or partially met all 7 milestones. GPE has cumulatively supported 18.5 million children, exceeding the milestone of 17.3 million. Among these, 48% were girls. We see a slow but steady progress on primary and secondary completion rates between 2011 and 2015, both of which exceeded the milestones. However, for FCAC countries, we see not much progress at the primary level. This is an issue that GPE will be concentrating on in the coming years. We see improvements in pre-primary enrollment rates also between 2011 and 2015. These are good improvements, but of course we expect to see this trajectory continuing into the future. We also see that the primary out-of-school rate decreased consistently between 2010 and 2015. But we have important challenges. The out-of-school rate is still high. It was 19% in 2015 overall, and for FCAC it was 26%. Although the rates have gone down between these years, the number of primary level out-of-school children has not decreased. And this is because the population increases have been at a higher rate and the capacity of the schooling systems is not keeping up. GPE countries are home to 43 million out-of-school children at the primary level, and the majority of these children live in countries affected by fragility and conflict. Now, when we look at gender parity, we see improvements at the lower secondary level, but stagnation at the primary level. The primary level line is the top one, the green line. And you can see that girls are 1.3 times more likely to be out of school than our boys. And this disparity has not decreased since 2005. The third GPE goal is to strengthen education systems. And in 2017, we measured 3 system-level indicators: domestic financing, pupil-to-train teacher ratio, and countries reporting key education indicators to UNESCO Institute for Statistics. As you can see, we met one of those milestones, but we did not meet two of the other milestones. So the positive news is that the DCPs, developing country partners, showed strong results on domestic financing. Domestic financing is a key foundation of an effective education system, and this indicator captures data under GPE 2020 strategy. These data are from 2015 and 2016. 79% of DCPs with available data either increased their public expenditure on education or maintained sector spending at 20% or above in 2016. This is similar to the data we see in 2015. We also know from disaggregated information that 9 countries with data did not meet these criteria. 3 of them were countries affected by fragility and conflict. The second system-level indicator is the percentage of DCPs meeting the pupil-to-trained-teacher ratio of 40:1, and this has stagnated between 2010 and 2015. If we consider only those countries that have data for all 5 years, we see a similar trend, and that's the dotted line that you see below the line up above, the non-dotted line up above. At the same time, if you look at the chart to your right, the good news is that this ratio has gone from very high to less high in 7 DCPs, even though they are above the 40:1 threshold. We see that at least the movement has been in the right direction. Now let's look at data reporting to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, UIS. We see a sharp decline in the percentage of countries reporting data to UIS between 2014 and 2015. This is partially due to a steep drop-off in reporting financing indicators. And that is the line in the middle below the green line. Reporting on service delivery indicators has remained low. That's the blue line on the bottom. And the reasons for this drop-off are varied, including fewer UIS regional workshops that assisted DCPs in understanding how to collate and report the data to UIS. We are keeping a close watch on this, and this is something that we're also following up with UIS on. Reporting of data to UIS is important. It's an important indicator for us, for GPE, for the partnership, because it exhibits DCP's efforts in monitoring the education system and sharing this information globally in a transparent way. This indicator, however, does not mean that the DCPs are not collecting this data. They may very well be collecting the data, simply not reporting it to UIS. So far, we have discussed impact and system-level data, so impact at the student level and outcomes at the system-level data, mostly from 2015. Now we turn to country-level objectives, planning, mutual accountability. This is where we can see the effects of the collective efforts of the partnership under the GPE 2020 strategy. So, turning to the quality of education sector plans, no milestone was set for this indicator for 2017. But data show that over 90% of the sector plans now meet overall quality standards. in 2016-2017. And this figure is significantly higher than at baseline in 2014 and 2015. This is good news because a strong quality education sector plan is the blueprint that countries use for what needs to happen to achieve student learning. However, we also note that there's no room for complacency, because when we look closely at the data, we see under overall quality, the achievability of the sector plans needs to improve, as does teaching and learning strategies. So there are elements of the sector plans that still need to improve. And of course, we need to see how the implementation of these sector plans actually unfolds. Now let's look at the second part of country-level objectives, mutual accountability. Mutual accountability is important in the partnership because it shows that all the partners are working together and holding each other accountable for progress at the country level. One of the indicators for mutual accountability is the composition of the local education groups, which together work on education improvement at the country level. The composition of the local education groups improved from baseline, with 53% of all local education groups, including civil society and teacher organizations, in the composition. This is a positive step in ensuring that key stakeholders are engaged. However, the quality of joint sector reviews did not meet the milestone. Joint sector reviews are the processes undertaken to ensure that actually the sector implementation is working and that there is follow-up action. A majority of the reviews were not participatory, evidence-based, and they were not used as instruments for change. So here you can see in 2019, only 32% met the quality benchmark, well below the 53% milestone. So this is an important aspect of the partnership, and clearly this is an area for improvement. Coming to the third country-level objective regarding effective and efficient partnership and the indicators to track GPE grant performance. So this pertains to how effective and efficient GPE financing is. On grant financing, the partnership tracks 3 indicators: plan versus achieve for textbook distribution, teacher training, and the building of classrooms. All indicators exceeded milestones reflecting efficient GPE grant implementation. Finally, we turn to data on global level objectives of more and better financing and building a stronger partnership. We see that the partnership is strong in most areas and met 9 out of 11 milestones. GPE raised in terms of financing, just to give you the highlights, GPE raised $10.5 million from non-traditional donors, and donors met their pledges to GPE and provided funding to education. GPE is becoming an increasingly important source of education overseas development aid. Between 2004 and 2016, the share of GPE financing for basic education has grown steadily in GPE countries and now constitutes 12% of ODA. But if we look at the alignment and harmonization of that aid, it's still a challenge. Both are critical features of the partnership, and both support effective and efficient. Both are indicators, rather, of effective and efficient financing. we see that all GPE grants are aligned with education sector plans. So if you look at both the left and the right side of this figure, you see 100% alignment with ESP's, education sector plans. But the non-aligned grants, so if you look at the left side of that chart, the non-aligned grants tend not to use government's budget, expenditure, and audit systems. If you look at the bottom dark purple bars. To be considered aligned, grants must meet 7 out of 10 criteria, and the non-aligned grants do not do that. So in conclusion, there is good progress with respect to several aspects of GPE's work. There's steady overall progress with respect to completion, but we also find that out-of-school children and gender parity still need continued urgent attention, especially in fragile and conflict-afflicted contexts. There's excellent progress with respect to sector planning, which is a central part of GPE's work. At the same time, the processes that support the partnership of mutual accountability and alignment that supports efficient financing need more in-depth attention. So, key areas for improvement include learning outcomes. As I mentioned already, children out of school, girls and children in FCACs. Also effective systems, trained teachers, and data systems, strengthening those aspects of education systems. So what is GPE, the partnership as a whole, doing to help improve these areas? Well, the first focus is to make the right investments, to refine and use GPE's results-based financing. 30% of GPE's funds are allocated for a variable tranche to reinforce results in equity and learning. So only to make that payment when results are achieved with respect to equity and learning that the DCPs themselves articulate. We reinforce value for money in the area of teacher development. So how can teachers be developed, trained, and supported? How deployment can be efficiently implemented. So this will be another area of work. It is ongoing and will be focused on more urgently in the coming years. And in the third area, we are improving GPE framework to work in fragile and conflict-affected contexts to get more children into school. We're also strengthening planning and monitoring, so focusing on the achievability of sector plans to strengthen their execution. As I mentioned earlier, this is one area that remains weak in the quality of sector plans. We would invest more in learning assessment systems, in better data, in monitoring the quality of teaching, and in strengthening the local education group and the joint sector review processes to strengthen those partnership aspects of GPE. And at the country level, obviously this requires engagement from all of the partners. And you can see here the list of partners that will play a role in this. So with that, let me stop and thank you again very much for participating in this webinar. I just want to hold up two of our publications that talk about these results in more depth. These are available online and will also be circulated after the webinar. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Victoria now.
Thank you so much, Nidhi, for that very informative and comprehensive presentation outlining some of the achievements and results that GPE financing is achieving through our country work, and also some of the challenges to implementation and GPE's actions to improve the impact of investments. Now is the time sort of to turn it over to our partners who are listening. So if you have questions, please do send them through, and we will put those to Nidhi and her team. In fact, we have a few questions already coming in. One of the first questions is, it's promising to see that the quality of GPE developing country partners' education sector plans have improved significantly since 2016 and 2017, respectively. Nevertheless, has the results report team found any evidence suggesting that improved education sector planning is associated with improved program implementation? So I'll address the question to you, Nidhi, but you may wish to pass it out to the rest of the team.
Okay. That's
Would you kindly come closer to the mic, please? This is from the interpreters. Thank you very much.
okay. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So let me just repeat the question. I'll paraphrase it. The question is, does improvement in the education sector plan actually lead to better implementation and results as a result of those plans? That's a really excellent question. That's certainly the hope and the hypothesis that, in fact, if you have a better quality plan, that it would lead to a better quality execution that focuses on the right issues in the sector because it's based on a good sector analysis, it has the right objectives, it has the right resourcing, and so forth. And that's a really excellent question. So these education sector plans are relatively new. We've done the quality assessment of these from 2016 to 2017. So we have yet to see how these sector plans unfold and whether they actually get implemented the way they're supposed to and whether they achieve the results they're supposed to achieve. We do have ongoing, and we're starting an evaluation on the education sector plan development grants that GPE provided to our developing country partners. And as part of that evaluation, we will also look at, are these plans actually getting implemented? What the problems might be in implementation, how those problems get addressed, whether those problems get addressed. So we don't have an answer on that right now, but that's certainly the hope and that's certainly the hypothesis that the evaluation is testing. As I mentioned previously, achievability has already been flagged as one of the issues, and how do we get that achievability right? That is something that we're going to be focusing on in the coming years. Let me turn to Rudraksh and Elise to see if you have something to add to that.
There's a question coming in from Danny, and the question is with regard to ODA. The question is, did the level of ODA rise or stay steady during the timeframes mentioned in the results report?
Mm-hmm. So I will turn to my colleague Elise, who can give the details. The level of ODA has gone up, some in education, so he can give details on that.
Yes, so the last results report pointed out that ODA... Okay, so the previous results report, so before this one, the 2017 one, so pointed out the fact that ODA went down from 2010 to 2014-15, but in 2016 ODA went a little bit up. So if my memory is good, so this means that so we can see that maybe the increase in the proportion of GPE contribution is perhaps due to the decrease in the overall ODA, but when you look at the actual figures, the absolute figures, we can see that GPE contribution has not only increased in terms of proportion of overall ODA, but also increased in terms of proportion. So that's what I can add.
Mm-hmm. In the actual amount, yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, so I'm looking at the figure in the report, and ODA did increase.
In 2016.
From 2015 to 2016.
Yes, but from 2010 to 2014.
It had declined.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. The next question is, the results report shows that GPE exceeded its targets for teachers through GPE-funded grants in 2017, yet the milestone for pupil-trained teacher ratio was missed. What are the report's findings on the underlying causes of poor performance with respect to provision of pupil-trained teachers? And maybe I'll hand that question over to you, Rudrash.
Thanks, Victoria. So first to point out that the indicator on the pupil-to-trained teacher ratios is measured with respect to 2015 data, while our indicator on teachers trained is from 2017. So in terms of GPE grants that have supported the training of teachers, we expect those effects to show up on the pupil-to-trained teacher ratio in a couple of years when new data from UIS are available. Alongside, as we noted during the presentation, several countries have improved in terms of their pupil-to-trained teacher ratios, but they haven't yet crossed GPE's threshold of 40 trained teachers per student. 40 students per trained teacher. And as they continue improving, as they go below that threshold of 40:1, we should see that the indicator on pupil-to-trained teacher ratios picks up. And finally, while GPE grants provide important financial support to teacher training in DCPs, these grants are only a small component of overall financing for education. So what GPE hopes to do with effective education sector analyses and then plans that are evidence-based and are developed on the basis of these education sector analyses is that countries identify their needs with respect to additional trained teachers and then adopt a sector-wide strategy to make more trained teachers available.
Great, thank you so much for that response, Rudrash. Nidhi, you highlighted one of the challenges being that the availability of data, and given the volatility of data on the impact indicators, how useful do you think annual fluctuations in the indicator values are to track the partnership's performance? Mm-hmm. Do you believe the partnership's actions have any impact in these indicators?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So, in terms of the higher level indicators, like the impact indicators or the outcome indicators that look at the completion rates, that look at dropout rates, etc., annual fluctuations might not be as important. What's really important is the trajectory. So what is the long-term trend? That's what we need to be looking at, because oftentimes, and this is an issue in most data reporting, there can be errors in how data get reported, how things get counted, how students get counted, how data gets transmitted from one level to another. So when we actually look at data, the system level data come from UIS. Most of the indicators for GPE come from UIS because the Unesco Institute of Statistics, because the countries report the data to UIS, and then we get data, we in GPE Secretariat get data from UIS. And if you look at data 1 year to the next, you will find differences by a few percentage points in the data reported. And that's because data always have errors in them. And so what's really important is to see trends long term. And so I'm not too worried about annual fluctuations. What we would like to see is an upward, the trajectory in the right direction, upward for some indicators and certainly downwards for the out-of-school children.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. Elisa, do you have anything to add?
Nothing special.
Another question that's come in is when can we expect to see findings from GPE's portfolio of country-led evaluations? Have the evaluations yielded any early insights which could potentially help us interpret the findings of the results report?
Sure. So the portfolio of country-level evaluations comprises about 30 case studies of individual countries. And the evaluation portfolio, really the country-level evaluation started in March of this year. So it's relatively new. We already have completed 2 evaluations, and they're online. You can go to, and we can circulate them, certainly. You can go to the GPE website as well. So by the end of this year, we will have completed what we call 8 baseline for 8 prospective evaluations. These are evaluations that are looking at the country level at the beginning of a new education sector plan cycle to see what happens over the course of next 2 years. And about 10, we will have completed 10 by the end of this year of what we call summative evaluations, which look at the end of the GPE grant to see how the grant was implemented and how the sector plan was implemented. So a synthesis report from these evaluations will be available in January of 2019, as well as the individual country level reports. We are happy to circulate the inception FAQs about the evaluations, as well as the ones that have been completed after the webinar. Early findings, it's on the basis of a few evaluations because we still have a number of them to do. But what we're finding is that there are certainly improvements needed in the operational model at the country level. And one of those is how the sector plans get monitored and implemented. Oftentimes there are weaknesses in actually knowing whether sector plans are being implemented. So that's certainly an area of improvement for how GPE works. We've put a lot of effort into upfront quality improvements of the education sector plans, and perhaps we need to also be looking at how the implementation challenges can also be supported at the country level. But again, this is a very early finding, and the evaluation is going to be looking at how the GPE operational model is functioning at the country level and what needs to be done to improve that.
Thank you. There's another question on data. So going back to the previous, the second to last question. And this question is, what is GPE's strategy to improve data quality and availability of data in the performance of education systems?
So I'll turn that question over to Rudraksh.
So there are several aspects of GPE's operational model that encourage the availability of more and better quality data. Most importantly, GPE countries that do not have strong education management information systems are required under GPE's operational model to develop time-bound and funded plans to actually develop these systems. And if they are unable to identify other sources of funding to fund these systems, then they're required to use funds from GPE grants towards the development of these systems. So GPE's model at the country level emphasizes the development of data systems and funds them where required. We also have a number of global and regional initiatives to improve the quality of data. As we mentioned during the results framework presentation, the availability of data on learning is a key challenge. We work through a number of regional networks and through our A4L initiative to fund improved data availability on learning. We also partner with UIS and through a new initiative, which is the Education Data Roundtable, to look at how global level solutions can be developed that help developing country partners to improve their education data systems and improve the analysis and international comparability of data.
You mentioned the data roundtable. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
For those of our partners that don't know too much about it.
Yeah. So the Data Solutions Roundtable brings together partners from developing country partners, the private sector, and other important multilateral organizations working on the question of education data. And it's looking to find solutions in the area of developing education management information systems that produce high quality, internationally comparable data, and then also solutions about how this data can be better used and visualized and presented at the global level to increase the value of this data to developing country partners.
Great. So this data roundtable demonstrates that GPE is not simply a grant financer, but is also pushing for innovations and solutions from different partners to address critical challenges. Thank you so much, Rudrash. Another question has come in from AJ. And it's on fragility and conflict. Fragility and conflict have a big impact on education systems, but has any research been undertaken on the effect of how strengthening education systems has reduced fragility and conflict?
So,
Go ahead.
So the strengthening of education systems is a key intermediate outcome in GPE's theory of change. What we hypothesize is that stronger education systems will lead to better and more equitable learning. And there's a significant body of research which shows that better learning is associated with better economic outcomes, but then also better a number of social and individual benefits, including better participation in civic and political processes. So the way that strengthened education systems can work to reduce fragility and conflict is by actually helping individuals in the country get better education and then participate more widely in economic, social, and political activity.
Thank you. You mentioned the importance of civic participation in this context, in the case of conflict and fragility. There's a question related to that, and the question is, it'll be interesting to know in the results report some good practice examples at country level of CSOs participating in the sector dialogue on engagement issues.
Yeah, actually, you'll be doing some of the discussion on that in Côte d'Ivoire, right? Would you like to answer that question?
Yes. So GPE is really involved at the country level to strengthen the education dialogue, and then this is through first of all the joint sector reviews, and then we have an indicator in the results framework, indicator 19, that really tracks the participation of civil society organization and teacher association to the local education groups. So the idea is that bringing people from different areas of the education system to participate in constructive discussion around education sector planning, so will probably be a good way to strengthen the education system and lead to constructive policies, so to tackle the education challenges. So GPE is really involved in that. And then I personally am going to Côte d'Ivoire to participate in one of these joint sector reviews. And then it's about reviewing the education sector plan, finding the key challenges, and then see how the different entities in the local education group, including civil society and then other members of the local education group, can really participate in reviewing the education sector plan and then finding solutions to the problems.
GPE is developing guidelines on how to do joint sector reviews. Yeah. So it's going to be a guide that local education groups and DCPs can use to really strengthen this participatory process of joint sector reviews. So those guidelines should be released soon, and they have been based on research and practices that were followed in DCPs to really draw on what works and to strengthen and support those processes.
And in addition to the guidelines, I believe GPE is also developing principles for local education groups, for effective local education?
Yes, there is one aspect of the guidelines that Nidhi mentioned. So it is whether the joint sector review is participatory. So, and then GPE has done some research on how to make the joint sector review more participatory, how to include all the entities in the local education group, how to make them, how to bring them together on the table and then to discuss education issues. So.
Okay, thank you so much, Elise. And Nidhi, we have another question here, perhaps controversial, who knows, but it makes the discussion exciting. The question is, I would like to ask if you have any measure of whether countries will be competent to develop their own ESPs without the help of GPE next time. In other words, do you have a capacity development measure? And that's a question, I suppose, related to the fact that in development, we should be working ourselves out of a job, in some degree.
I mean, that's again a very good question, and part of the evaluation that I mentioned previously will also look into the issue of what capacity is being developed in supporting education sector planning, education sector analysis, and so forth. I think it's also a question of how we unlock the knowledge. It's not just developing the knowledge or capacity, but it's also in some instances unlocking the capacity and unlocking the knowledge and having those practices be shared across DCP. So it's not simply, I would challenge the notion just of the development piece, but also to say how can we actually, there are certain practices that work in certain contexts and how those can be shared. So GPE is a lever of also building a community of practice that can bring up practices that have been good across countries and to enable the sharing of those practices. And in fact, one of our new mechanisms for for pushing the goals of GPE will be this knowledge and information exchange and learning platform that's just being developed. So,
thank you so much, Nidhi. Another question that has come in, and sorry, that last question was from Suzanne Durston. Another question that has come in is that performance on grant alignment has been poor for 2 consecutive years. Can we expect to see any improvement in this indicator next year? What are the actions that GPE Secretariat Management is proposing to improve grant alignment?
Mm-hmm. So I'll talk about that briefly and then turn to Elise. So alignment is a complex issue. As you saw, actually we can go back to that slide. The grant has to meet 7 out of 10 and 10 criteria. And the dimensions along which the grants are not aligned have to do with financial management systems, audit systems, public expenditure systems, and so forth. The way in which we are measuring alignment is that we look at it year to year based on the grants that are active. Now, the pool of active grants doesn't change that much from year to year. You have some grants that close in a year, some additional grants that come into the pool that are new. And so, by and large, you're measuring the same stock year to year. So we cannot expect to see huge improvements in this because if a grant is unaligned to begin with, it stays unaligned. If it's aligned to begin with, it stays aligned. So we will see improvements only gradually. That's one point. The second point is that alignment is also dependent on the grant agents. So grant agents are organizations that actually they take and implement the grant together with DCPs. So GPE is not implementing, the GPE Secretariat is not implementing the grants directly. It's the grant agents that are doing that. And their policies come into play. So for example, if a DCP, the public financial management system is not strong, the policy of the grant agent may not allow that grant agent to have a grant that is aligned on that dimension. So it's a very complicated issue, and it's something that we are looking at to see what are some of the good practices, how can those policies be improved so that they allow for, in some instances where maybe capacity is weak, but allow for the grant to be aligned so that it serves as a function of strengthening the public financial management system. Let me turn to Elise to give a little more detail on that.
Yes, so I have 2 points. The first is referring to the question about whether we are expecting any improvement. So just to say that we already have the data, so and then the alignment indicator is expected to improve. So we already have this improvement. So the second question is, what is GPE doing regarding alignment? As Nidhi mentioned, so we are really working with the grant agent to make sure alignment happens. But we have to consider 2 things. So the first thing is that we have some countries with very weak systems. So and then sometimes alignment would not be a good thing to do. So and then on the other side, we have countries with very, very good institutions where alignment can take place. So there is an alignment task force within the Secretariat working on identifying these countries where the system is maybe ready to absorb GPE funds, and then the task force is working with the grant agent in the countries, the DCPs, to improve the alignment. So that's it.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. There is another question here, I think from a CSO perspective. The rise of political polarization is threatening education systems. Some governments are even using textbooks to promote their political ideology in schools. What is GPE's stand towards such areas? I'm not sure if this is squarely within the results report, but it's a question that has come through.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. And the way GPE's model works is that, the education sector plans are the blueprint that we use. So it's the education sector plans are country owned, and the country sets out its own goals and its own objectives. Of course, GPE incentivizes improvement in specific areas such as equity. We focus very much on equity. We focus very much on gender equality. We focus on learning through looking at the quality of the education sector plans, and then providing GPE financing to close some of the financing gap of the education sector plan. So, it is country driven, and I can't answer the question directly from a results point of view, but just to say that it's a country driven model. I don't know if my colleagues have anything to add to that.
No, I mean, all I'd add is that it's GPE is not prescriptive about issues like the contents of textbooks. So GPE's role is to identify and to disseminate and to incentivize good practice in these areas. But the process of developing textbooks is entirely a country-owned process that GPE is not prescriptive of.
Thank you for highlighting the fact that GPE is not prescriptive and it is a country-driven process. We have a few more questions still coming in. Given some of the challenges in education systems across low middle income countries, is there a silver bullet to improving education systems?
Well, I think from results, that's really from, I guess, an implementation point of view, not necessarily a results point of view, I think we don't see silver bullets. And that's why GPE's model really is around country-owned processes, holistic processes, non-prescriptive, except around what good principles are important. So we do, how to focus on equity, not how, but focus on equity. So, we're looking not at micro processes, we're looking at really how do you get results at the student level, and therefore what do you need to do, what is right within the context. There are certain principles we think are important. So for example, when we talk about data systems, we know data systems are important. It's not a silver bullet, it's an important component. We know a focus on learning assessments is important, because how do you know students are learning unless you actually have some measurement for it? Again, so it's not prescriptive, but it's saying that these are some key elements of a good, strong education system, and then good teachers, trained teachers, having low ratios. 40-1, it's not an extremely low ratio, but it's not a high ratio. It's setting some sort of a benchmark. So there are key principles, but we're not saying exactly how those things can be achieved. And that's part of the reason that GPE has the country-driven process, and part of the reason that we're developing these the KICS mechanism that I mentioned, where good practices can be shared, and context can also be discussed in terms of, how things get implemented, how countries approach, let's say, their curriculum, for example, things of that nature. So, do you have?
And this may be our last question. What areas of GPE results are most difficult to monitor? How can the partnership work together to improve this area?
Mm-hmm. I think, the most difficult to monitor is the learning. Are students actually learning? And as we noted earlier on, we have very little data on learning. And as you know, SDG 4 is all about attaining proficiency in learning in certain areas. So that's what we're aiming for, is to have students, have systems produce students who are capable, who have come out of the system having learned what they were supposed to have learned, and the years of schooling are of quality, so not just sitting in seats in schools, but actually having learned something. So this is something that is a huge focus of GPE now. Part of our variable tranche, as I mentioned earlier, is around making sure that systems are focusing on learning. So this is the hardest part, I would say.
Yeah, I would say another area that is very difficult to monitor is the implementation of education sector plans. Mm-hmm. So we finance the elaboration of the education sector plans, but when it comes to the implementation, so it is very, very difficult to capture what is going on at the country level. So we have some proxy indicators, like indicator 18, on the quality of the joint sector review. But so having a clear understanding of how the ESP is implemented and what are the outcomes, so it is very, very difficult to get.
Yeah. I agree. We don't have a good process yet for it. As I mentioned, the evaluations will be looking at that, and that's one of the things that we will focus on. And that's something probably the GPE strategy going forward should address.
I actually got ahead of myself, and I said that was the last question. Some more questions have actually come through. Zhu says that he or she looks forward to seeing more good practice examples of CSO engagement at the country level. And he also has that was Endemak, us who made that comment. And Zhu has the question, does the country-driven model only focus on government? Or is there a way to promote and hold governments accountable for the participation of other social sectors in educational planning processes? And that question, I imagine, speaks to the fact that within the new agenda, we are to be much more cross-sectoral in our approach to both education and health, etc., etc. So I can repeat the question.
Yeah, please.
Does the country-driven model only focus on government, or is there a way to promote and hold governments accountable for effectively working across sectors, so the participation of other social sectors in educational planning processes?
So my take on this question is in the GPE JSR guidelines.
Please a little closer to the microphone.
Okay.
So the interpreter, thank you kindly.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to try to speak louder. Okay. So, as Nidhi mentioned before, we have developed a JSR guidelines. So, to give ideas of how to really prepare the JSR and how to have a good quality of the JSRs. And then, as I mentioned before, one of the key areas of the JSR is the JSR being participatory. And then in this guide, so we talk about how to make the JSR really comprehensive, how to bring other entities outside the education system, outside the education sector to participate in the JSR. For instance, it's very important to bring the Ministry of Finance because everything is about finances. So if your plan is good, you don't have the necessary budget to execute it. So anything is going to happen. So, and then other ministries are also encouraged to participate in the education JSR. For instance, the Ministry of Health, so Ministry of Planning, and so on. So GPE is really encouraging a participatory process of the joint sector review, and then encouraging the education sector to open the JSR to other ministries.
Also, I think as part of the planning process, it is government led, so it is education ministry led generally. We are also developing a private sector strategy. There has to be some ownership of the sector plan somewhere that needs to reside somewhere. And that is generally led by the Ministry of Education. But the whole idea of mutual accountability is that all partners, CSOs, donors, other ministries, all come together and endorse that sector plan and work on it together. So it is supposed to be a joint product, but of course there is one ministry that has to be in charge of, or a lead ministry that has to take it forward.
And I would say, in addition to the programmatic work, trying to encourage cross-sectoral collaboration with different line ministries, given that sometimes there are lack of appropriate institutional arrangements and frameworks for this, and there needs to be strong political commitments to doing so as well. So in addition to the programmatic work, GPE also works in the area of global advocacy and is engaging in dialogue at that level and at the regional level on education and integrating its advocacy in other sectors as well to encourage that collaboration between the different sectors and to encourage that political leadership.
Exactly, and we actually, just to build on that, we had the Civil Society Education Fund that supported civil society organizations' engagement in education, in the education sector in their countries. And we have an upcoming mechanism called the ASA, the Advocacy and Social Accountability. Thank you, ASA. We get so used to acronyms. And that also will support, sort of the advocacy piece by all partners and social accountability mechanisms outside of government. So that's still it's in the blueprint is ready and it should be rolled out early next year.
So, in addition to the ASSA, Advocacy and Social Accountability Mechanism, which Nidhi said is still being rolled out, we do engage in dialogue at the global level and regional level on advocacy on education with other sectors as well, as we're also awaiting ASSA to be finalised. Fantastic. I think those are all the questions. Do we have any more, team, online?
I think one last question.
Oh, one last question.
Here on the channel asking how the right to education will be ensured in case of private sector engagement. Just keep English.
Okay, how can GPE help countries enhance budget utilization capacity as it's a bottleneck to increase education budgets in some countries, e.g., for example, Bangladesh was an example given. So how can GPE help countries enhance budget utilization capacity as it's a bottleneck to increasing education budgets in some countries? Mm-hmm. So because there's poor absorption capacity or execution capacity, governments are then not likely inclined to want to increase the budget. Mm-hmm. I think that's the question. So what are we doing in that area?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a really, really good question, and I think part of that is the ongoing support provided through the GPE grants that also focus on system strengthening. So strengthening the capacity at the central level of education ministries, strengthening capacity at the local and regional level. So those kinds of activities and policies are built into many of the GPE grants focus on system strengthening. And again, so GPE grants support some of the implementation, but a lot also then comes down to how sector planning is done and how planning is done in terms of sector implementation, how GSR processes are used effectively for identifying the roadblocks and making sure that those roadblocks get addressed. So it's a process, and it's really the partnership. It's not necessarily what's tagged as GPE. It's really how the partnership works at the country level, and we're trying to support the strengthening of those processes and systems at the country level.
Thank you. And there is one last question, I think, and you mentioned a private sector strategy. So the question is, and again, perhaps slightly controversial, but it's good to have these questions. How is the right to education, or how will the right to education be ensured in case of private sector engagement? And I suppose the question is to do with what is GPE doing in that area?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we ascribe to the right to education of children, so the private sector strategy has to fit within that. I mean, I don't, it's still being defined, and certainly the GPE board will look at it very carefully because we focus on, as you can see, our goals are, we ascribe to SDG 4. So it's learning for all children, and it's equity and gender equality. So we ascribe to those goals. So any strategy has to really fit within those goals. We cannot have any strategy that does not lead to those goals. And we have an operational model where, we follow government-led processes that also have mutual accountability built in. So any strategy, any private sector strategy would need to fit within those broad principles. It's still under development, so yeah.
And just to add, also fit into the strategic objective number 4 or number 5 on strengthening the partnership. Mm-hmm. So it would have to strengthen the partnership and not undermine the partnership.
Exactly, yeah.
So I will add that in terms of the private sector involvement in education, when we look at the population figures, we can see that the youth population is experiencing a huge increase. The growth rate is very high. And then we have some limitations in terms of the public sector capacity to provide education for all those kids. So in that regard, so private sector is very, very important. And then building a stronger public-private partnership. So it would be very, very important to meet the education needs.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly what the strategy will be, but that's we do see at the country level, in many countries, this public-private partnership. But there are many, many different models at the country level.
But it's important to say it's not yet finalised and it's still a work in progress with all the constituencies of the partnership being involved and consulted. Thank you very much, everybody. Let me now give the floor back to you, Nidhi, to maybe wrap up.
Okay.
I think we've finished all the questions.
Yes. Well, thank you all very much for participating and for your interest in GPE, for your participation in GPE, if you are participating in GPE through your organizations, and for your interest in following what GPE is achieving and what the results are. As I mentioned previously, we will have another report in June 2019, which will talk a lot more about the learning assessment, the main goal of GPE. So thank you for your comments and questions. I mean, we had a wide number of comments and some very important ones, like the issue of alignment, like the issue of the engagement of CSOs and other partners in the partnership. An important question around, well, if we have good quality education sector plans, do they actually get implemented? And what does it mean in terms of achieving outcomes? And how do we actually support countries in their capacity for implementation? So some very, very important questions. I also mentioned the evaluation program we have ongoing that will answer some of those questions or provide some sense of what the answers might be. So those will be available online. And we have, some of you asked about how we work with the private sector strategy and what other mechanisms we might have to support countries. So we mentioned the KICS and the ASA and the private sector strategy, 3 things that are coming up within the next year or so from GPE. So let me stop there, and I thank you again. And again, here is the results report, the full report, and a brochure, and we'll be sending these to you through email after this session.
We will. Thank you so much, Nidhi, for highlighting the very many and important levers that GPE has to really strengthen the impact of its financing and support to countries, including the results report and the other initiatives that are being launched. And thank you to Elise and to Rudrash, who had to leave us. So in addition, I'd also like to thank colleagues from the GPE webinar team and everybody that participated to this webinar today with your questions and your comments. And it's what makes this webinar very interactive and lively when we have this interaction with you all. So thank you again very much. And we look forward to engaging with you in the next GPE webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Serena. Thanks, Elise.